Good evening and welcome to all of you. I'm Joanne Cook, Director of the National Louis University Masters in Written Communication program. Whether you are coming to NLU for the first time or members of our cherished alumni, whether you came because of the Cubs and your own Wrigley Field memories, or because you're curious about our written communication program or our new undergraduate applied communications program, whether you came because you wanted to meet a Pulitzer Prize winner, you might be friends of Ira's, in fact, I know some of them are here, or if you came because of free drinks and sports talk, or whether you're out there watching this on our streaming video, I give a warm welcome to all of you. It's a pleasure to have you all here. The NLU Masters in Written Communication program, sponsors of the Evenings of Pulitzer winners, offers a wide variety of writing classes led by incredible instructors and published writers. Now it's my pleasure to introduce Ira Bercow. Mr. Bercow is the author of 20 books, his latest being Wrigley Field. I will hold it up for a show and tell. It is an oral and narrative history of the home of the Chicago Cubs, written with Josh Noel. It is this beautiful volume filled with wonderful photos. Some of you have already purchased a copy, but if you didn't get a chance to and you decide you would like to get a copy of Wrigley Field, that will be available, and Ira will stay a little bit after to sign those copies as well. Other books by Ira include The Corporal Was a Pitcher, The Courage of Lou Brissy, Ira's wonderful memoir, Full Swing, Hits, Runs, and Errors in a Writer's Life, the bestsellers Red, a biography of Red Smith, and the book Maxwell Street, Survival in a Bazaar. His book, The Dusable Panthers, was named one of the best young adult books of the last 75 years by the New York Public Library. He collaborated on the autobiography, Hank Greenberg, The Story of My Life, which was made into an award-winning documentary, The Life and Times of Hank Greenberg. For 26 years, Ira Bercow was a sports columnist and feature writer for the New York Times. In 2001, he shared his Pulitzer Prize for national reporting for his article, The Minority Quarterback. His magazine articles have appeared in Esquire, the New York Times Magazine, Chicago, Reader's Digest, Sports Illustrated, and many others. In the New York Magazine's Best of New York annual, Mr. Bercow was named one of the, quote, treasures of New York City, the best sports writer in New York, which is saying quite a lot. As Gay Talese wrote, Ira Bercow belongs to that rare breed, a writer who specializes in sports, but whose subjects represent a broad range in human aspirations and challenges. Tonight, I will have the pleasure of asking some of the first questions of Mr. Bercow, or Ira as I've come to know him. We will then open up the questions and conversation to all of you. Now, please join me in giving a warm welcome to Pulitzer Prize winner, glorious writer on sports, and on heroes sung and unsung, Ira Bercow.
Joanne, after that introduction, there's no point in me saying anything. I would like for you to continue.
You just would like to bask in the glory of it. But I am going to ask you a question which may reveal some of the hidden truths about Ira. Having won the Pulitzer Prize, journalism's highest honor, should we assume you showed great talent from the time you were a child or a teenager?
Do not assume that. I grew up on the west side of Chicago, which is now called the Lawndale District, in the K streets. I was just beyond that. I grew up on Roosevelt and Springfield, Roosevelt Road in Springfield. And I went to Bryan Grammar School, which was on Kedvale, and there was Karlov and Kaminsky and all the K streets. And I was kind of a boy of the streets, really. I mean, my introduction to Wrigley Field was sneaking into Wrigley Field. I was a little big for my age, and I was about 10 years old, and my friends were 12, 13, 14, and they showed me how to sneak into Wrigley Field. You go early to the games, among other things, and we went through the vendor's gate, and I was stopped, and one of my friends said, if they stop and ask you what you're going to be selling, just tell them it's beer. And I was 10 years old, so they threw me out. So I didn't get into the ballpark that day. But the next time I came back and I said I was going to sell popcorn. But neither one of my parents went to the second year of high school. My father was a boy during the Depression, and he was an orphan during the Depression. And my mother grew up in the Maxwell Street area, and immigrant family. My father's family was from Romania. My mother's family was from Russia. And although they were very bright people, and my father read some, but it really wasn't a reading household. And growing up on the West Side, I knew no professional people. And I mean, the only doctor I went to was the dentist, who I avoided because they had those big drills. And I wrote for the Bryan Grammar School paper, just poems, but never thought of it, just silly poems. And never thought about being a writer. And then I went to high school. I moved to the North Side. And I played high school, I played basketball and baseball for the high school team. And the whole idea when I was in high school was I majored in eligibility. So I finished in the lower quarter of my high school graduating class. And I read a total of 3 books in high school. And I can't remember the names of them now. But I tore ligaments in my last semester of my ankle, and I didn't play the last part of the high school season. And my dad he said, you have to read something, and which I wasn't doing a lot of reading, and he said, you have to read something. And he gave me a book called 30 Days to a More Powerful Vocabulary. And he said, words are power. And so I was on crutches at the time, and I looked at other things, and the book was lying there, and so I picked it up, and it was like Alice going into Wonderland. I went through, I don't know if any of you have ever read 30 Days to More Powerful Vocabulary, or any of those vocabulary type books, building vocabulary. But every day there's a new segment of words and so forth, and oh my God, loquacious and propensity. And this was fabulous, and I just loved it. And then I went back to school, and I had all these words at my command. And I mean, nobody else in my high school, had more than 15 words in their vocabulary. And so, I mean, I was like brilliant. And I even started studying a little bit, and I made the honor roll my last semester, which probably kept me from finishing last in the class, in my graduating class. And then I went to, this is going to be a longer answer than I think that you bargained for.
That's fine.
And then I went to Roosevelt University. First I went to the University of Illinois. It was Navy Pier then. And you took a test, an essay test, and where they would place you. And they had three levels of what they call rhetoric classes, English classes. One was remedial, for the dummies, the real dummies, which I was prepared for at this point. And then the regular one was called 101. It was 100, 101 for most people. And then there was 101S, like special for a class of people who were really maybe even gifted in the language. And I wrote an essay, and I had fun with it, and I didn't think much of it. And they put me in the 101S class. So I walked in the 101S class, and there was a kid in the class. I knew one kid. His name was Richard Rubenstein. And it was not Ron Rubenstein. There's Ron Rubenstein's grandchild and son there. But it was Richard Rubenstein. He went to grammar school with me at Bryan Grammar School. And he was known as a brain. Okay. And I immediately knew I was in the wrong place. Because if Richard Rubenstein was in this class, this wasn't for me. So, but it was. And then we had to write a book report, I guess it was. And for some reason, I chose Eisenhower's Crusade in Europe. Why, I don't know. And it turns out that Richard Rubenstein also chose Crusade in Europe. And then we handed in the book reports, and then the teacher, the professor, said, by coincidence, I have 2 book reports on the same book. And she said, I'm not going to mention the names, but I'm going to read both reports. And then I'm going to tell you which one is better than the other. And so she read Richard Rubenstein's first, without mentioning his name. I said, oh my God. I began to slink into the seat. Then she read mine, and at this point I was almost slunk to the floor. This was embarrassing, and I'm glad she wasn't mentioning any names. And then she said, now I'm going to tell you why the second one is better than the first one.
Wow.
And I did well in the class. But the odd thing is, I had no idea about writing, and this had no impact, as far as I was concerned, on any career. And it was just, I'd been placed in this class, I did okay, and that was the end of that. And then I transferred to Roosevelt University, and at the Pier, for some reason, I was going to major in accounting. And I stopped going to classes, and I did poorly in accounting and math, because I didn't go to class at all, and I flunked out. So I went across to Roosevelt University, and I majored in English. And within 1 semester, not only did I make the dean's list, but they gave me a scholarship, academic scholarship. And so I was there for 3 semesters, and then I went to, and then, but again, and I did okay in English, and but I was thinking, what am I going to do with my life? And I had no direction, and I worked on Maxwell Street. I owned a belt stand on Maxwell Street at one point. Before that, I sold women's nylons. Some of you may not know Maxwell Street, but it was an old world marketplace, which is now torn down, and it's at the University of Illinois Chicago now. Rebuilt that into the University of Illinois Chicago. But it was a marketplace, and I just thought, probably I'll be a salesman. Then I started thinking more about it, and then I decided I wanted to go away to college because I thought that maybe I could do something with my life. And so I applied to Miami University in Oxford, Ohio, which I heard was a beautiful campus, and it was away from Chicago. And I wanted to get away from Chicago because I was enjoying myself too much. And I loved my friends, I loved the city, but I thought, if I keep spending my life laughing, so I went to Miami of Ohio, and then my life changed. I was going to major in English again, but I was living across the dormitory from a guy who I became friendly with named Dave Bergen. And Dave was the assistant sports editor of the school paper. And we talked, and I was an English major, and I was interested in sports as he was, and I had played sports. And he said, why don't you come write on the school paper? And I had never thought about doing anything like that, and I said, well, I've never tried it. He said, come on, if there's a problem, I'll help you with it. And he did. And so I wrote a piece for the paper about tennis. It was about, the Miami University team was going to play the Xavier team. And I wrote a line, something like, after the game, Miami wiped out Xavier in tennis, and I said, continuing the mastery of the funny fuzzy ballers of Xavier, something like that. Anyway, it seemed to be a hit, and when there was the counselor and some of the others got together to talk about the school paper, started talking about my article, and they started talking about other articles. And then when Dave Bergen became the sports editor, he said, I want you to write a column. And I said, writing a column, what do I do? And he said, just write anything you want. And short of libel, he said. And so I started writing this column. And I really loved it. I would write a column, and I'd go to bed at night, and I couldn't sleep because I'd be rewriting the column in my head and changing the sentences and changing the ending and changing the lead, even though it was already in and about to be in type. And of course, this has never stopped. I'm always rewriting my stuff anyway. I'll go back 30 years and something, and oh God, did I write that? But anyway, I really liked it. And I planned to be a lawyer. I read about Clarence Darrow, and because I had no other direction, and I just thought I'd be a lawyer and I'd get rich, So I became a newspaper man and got poor. But I really liked this, and I was a fan of a sports writer who was a literary figure in America, and I didn't realize it was Red Smith. His name was Red Smith, and he was syndicated, and his column ran in the Chicago Sun-Times, and he ran in about 250 newspapers across the country, but his flagship paper was the New York Herald Tribune. And later I learned Hemingway was a fan of his, and Hemingway mentioned him with praise in one of his novels and others, and he was a literary figure, but he was a sports writer. And the reason that I got to start reading Red Smith in Chicago Sun-Times when I was in high school, in which I didn't read too much, but the high school basketball box scores were next to the Red Smith column. And so I would get up in the morning and get the paper, and I'd look for my name in the box score, and it was 004 or 5. That means no baskets, no free throws, 5 fouls, something like that. But every once in a while I did a little bit better. But anyway, next to that was Red Smith's column. And I just started reading Red Smith's column, and it was moving. He was funny, he was poignant, and when he made a point, as it turns out, it was almost like an entertaining legal brief. The guy was fabulous. And when I started writing the column, I thought, I really want to get good at this. And who else but Red Smith would know what I want to do? And I thought maybe he could help me. I mean, I'm a columnist, he's a columnist. So I sent him 2 of my columns. And about 3 or 4 weeks later, I get an envelope at my dormitory. Well, now I was living off campus. I get a letter, W.W. Smith, Walter Wellesley Smith, and from Stamford, Connecticut. I open it up. Dear Ira Bercow. I always wondered why he said, Dear Ira Bercow. I wondered, because some people think Ira is a feminine name sometimes. There was Ira von Furstenberg, or some of this. Maybe you didn't know. Anyway, he called Dear Ira Bercow. And sometimes I get mail to Ms. Ira Bercow. So he said, Dear Ira Bercow. When I was a cub reporter for the Milwaukee Journal and writing a lead, the city editor would walk by and look over my shoulder at the lead. If he liked what he saw, he'd nod and walk away. If he didn't, he'd say, try again. My advice to you is try again. And again. If you're for this business, and not many really are, you'll have an eternity of sweat and tears ahead. And he said, my first impulse was to write in paste up these columns and write in marginal criticisms, but they would not have made you happy. Then he had a couple of points that I made that he was critical of, helpful. And he said, but keep doing it. You do it your way. God bless Red Smith. So, should I be depressed that the great Red Smith didn't like my work as much as I would have hoped? Or was I flattered? Should I be flattered that he took the time to write me a letter? I decided to be flattered. And I took those 2 columns, I pasted them up on typing paper, white paper, folded them into an envelope, and I said, "Dear Mr. Smith, please make me unhappy." And I sent it off, and he sent back those columns with criticisms that a copy editor would make, but great criticisms. And then I began a correspondence with him, not on a regular basis, but periodically. And he would say, and then one day he came back with columns, and he wrote, "You're showing decided improvement." Decided became my all-time, to this day, favorite word. Decided. And it wasn't in 30 Days to More Powerful Vocabulary, but I went beyond that. And then we corresponded, and then when I came to New York, I worked for a newspaper enterprise association, a feature syndicate. And then I got a job with the New York Times, and the sports editor actually said, they called me and they said, "Red Smith has not been feeling too well, and we don't know how much longer he can do a column, and we'd like to hire you as the possible next columnist for Red." And I said, "I hope Red writes forever." I said, "But I'll be happy to join the New York Times." So I did. And by this time, I'd forgotten all about being a lawyer, about being Clarence Darrow.
What an incredible honor that was for you to replace your hero.
Well, it was and it was, and I felt, a little queasy about it, but okay. And so I didn't see him for about 6 or 7 months. And then we were both covering a World Series, and I saw him, and we had these big computers, what they call Teleram, these big computers that we would send the stuff. They had, what do you call those things on the top, where you put the phone in, couplers, yeah. And so, that's how old it was. It was a big thing, and I wasn't very good mechanically, and I was sitting, and I had to write my story before the game, and I was trying stuff, and it wasn't working, and I said, and almost to myself, I said, "Does anybody know how to work this thing?" And then I heard a sort of a gravelly voice. Let me try. And it was Red Smith, looking older and looking older. And then Red did this, and this, and then the machine began to hum. And I said, "Red, after all these years, and I still need you." And then, this was in October, and in January 15th, I was home writing a column, and the sports editor called and said, he said, "Ira, I got some bad news." He said, "Red died." And he said, "We have an in-house obituary, but we think we can do better, and we'd like you to write the obituary." And I did. And it appeared, and the next morning, I went to get the paper at my doorstep, and on the front page, below the fold, but on the front page of the New York Times, was the obituary on Red Smith. And it was fairly extensive. And at one point in the obituary, I said, and Red Smith, and Mr. Smith was generous with help to college students. And I quoted from one of his letters. I may have quoted from the Try Again letter, And anyway, people had said at the paper that it seemed to break ground because it seemed like a personal obituary, which is unusual for the New York Times.
Right.
And I said, well, I try to make it Timesian, but it was personal. And that's the story.
That's a beautiful story. And maybe for those who are students out there, especially those at the graduate writing program, it's what we try to do is we try to have people do their draft of whatever kind of writing it is and then take a look at it and try to make helpful suggestions and then say, this is decidedly better. So, the latest of your 20 books spans 100 years of Wrigley Field, a place where people have witnessed some of the most thrilling, well, more of the most heartbreaking games in baseball history. How did you and Josh Noel even begin to tackle this vast subject? For example, did you start with the oldest living Cubs, the oldest fans? Just how do you wrap around that enormous subject?
Well, I started with a fairly middle-aged fan, me. You know, the narrative it's an anecdotal history with not a lot of bibliography and so forth. And I mean, I interviewed through the years. I would, of course, come to Chicago, and through the started writing professionally in '65 at Minneapolis Tribune. And that's another part of the story that after Miami, I went to Northwestern and graduate school, Medill, and then I got my first job at the Minneapolis Tribune and moved on. By the way, the sports editor of the Minneapolis Tribune, who wouldn't let me write it first, and I was hired over him. I was working on the desk, and I was a little recalcitrant about answering the phones and editing. And this sports editor called me in his office. I'd been a professional journalist for about 3 months now. And he said, Ira, he said, you're a bright young man, but I think you've picked the wrong profession. Okay. So, but anyway, that's an addendum to the other story. So how I did and then years later, he would take credit for whatever success I had, this sports editor. It was, you know, through the years, I would come to Chicago and started writing out of New York and in '67. And the Cubs were in the news always. I mean, in '69, you know, they lost they lost to the Mets, and even though it looked like they were going to get into the World Series for the first time since 1945, it didn't happen. And '84, it didn't happen. They were close. In 2003, it didn't happen. But they were always a story. They're always compelling. And they had interesting people, you know, and so and I always found the way to do stories, and so I had, you know, a backlog of Cub stories and Cub interviews. I mean, Ernie Banks and Billy Williams and Santo, and a whole slew, Pafko, Hank Sauer, a whole slew of these people that I could bring in, and they were always timely because they're talking about those times. And then I got to know DeRocher, and I got to know a bunch of the managers. I got to know Lou Piniella. And Lou told me something interesting. I was in his office when he was manager of the Cubs. And he said, you know, I never realized until I became manager here the burden that fans had and would put on the players of losing all these years. He said, I never really understood that until I got here. He said, people are always coming up to me and saying, do you think the Cubs will get into the World Series of my lifetime? And he said, it really disturbed me when an 8-year-old kid said this to me. And then, you know, I forgot what year he left, but he left. The Cubs are losing. They're in last place again. I think he'd been here for 4 or 5 years. And then he left in August. He didn't finish out the season. He said his mother in New Jersey was sick and he had to go see her. This is in August, you know, and so, I mean, my contention on Lou Piniella was he didn't just leave the Cubs, he fled. But it was, and so I had this, and then I would, I still would make my phone calls and talk to people, and then, but I realized I didn't want to do all the work myself. And then there was at the back of the book, there's something called Wrigley Memories. Interviews with fans, but mostly celebrated people. And I And so I knew Josh Noel who was a Chicago Tribune reporter, a very good one and a good writer. And I knew Josh Noel from before he was born because I was best friends, and still am, with his father, who I graduated high school with, Howard Noel. And so, and I followed Josh, and Josh has called me his mentor, and I knew Josh was a great Cub fan who would do a great job of interviewing people, and for this Wrigley Memories. And he did. And for example, we have Kerry Wood writing the foreword to the book, and it was an interview with Kerry Wood that Josh conducted, but it was so good, we asked Kerry if we might use it as a foreword. And then in the Wrigley Memories, I had told Josh that I had talked to, that Lou Piniella told me that when Rod Blagojevich was the governor of Illinois, that Blagojevich would call Piniella and make suggestions on lineup changes and pitching rotations and who to trade and who to get. And Piniella said, I listened politely, but I didn't listen to anything he said. So I wanted to get Blagojevich. I thought that he would really be interesting, and as a crazed Cub fan, he would be helpful. And so Josh says, yeah, but he's on trial. I said, but he goes to lunch. He goes to lunch, and Josh didn't get him. Josh didn't get him at lunch, but Josh stalked him. I wouldn't say stalked him, but left messages. We went to his home, left messages, and then finally, and he had his phone number, and he called him, and he left a message. He said, I only want to talk about the Cubs. And then Blagojevich called him, and Josh said, I asked him 3 questions over a period of 2 hours. And he talked. And so that was that. But, and I did a few of those interviews myself. And 2 of the interviews were with Justice John Paul Stevens, former Supreme Court Justice John Paul Stevens, who has been a Cub fan since he was 7 years old in 1927. He's now 94 years old, retired from the Supreme Court. And I got him to do, it was a Wrigley Memory, but then again, he was so good, and I said, Justice Stevens, would you mind if we use this interview as a preface? And he said, fine. And then the other interview that I did, which was very short, was I was invited to a baseball game in Washington, D.C. with the Washington Nationals. And I don't know if any of this is answering your question, by the way.
This is fine.
This is 2010, and the Washington Nationals had a young phenom named Strasburg who was going to pitch his first game, and he was going to pitch it against the White Sox. And the White Sox owner, Jerry Reinsdorf, who I know, was as a courtesy, the home team gives the visiting owner a box. And so somehow through other friends, I knew Reinsdorf, I was invited to go in the box. So just before the game, a tall black man enters the box wearing a Sox cap. And yes, it was the president. He came in. So he's sitting right by me, and for 9 innings, we sort of circulated. And I had just started working on the book. I did not know, had forgotten, that when he was running for the presidency in 2008, there was a radio interview, and the interviewer asked him about being a White Sox fan. And he said, the interviewer said, well, how would you compare the Cubs fans to White Sox fans? And he said, White Sox fans are real baseball fans. Cub fans, they go to Wrigley Field, they drink their latte, they don't even watch the game, they socialize or whatever, you know. And this is a radio interview. Well, I don't know if any of you remember this, But as the saying went, it went viral, okay? And this was a rather big mistake, especially for Chicago, even though Chicago's gonna go Democratic anyway, but it was, you know, and he riled up a bunch of fans. And I had not realized this. Okay. So, near the end of the game, before he was gonna leave, I said to him, Mr. President, I hate to pass up this opportunity, but I'm doing a book on Wrigley Field and the Cubs, and I wonder if you'd comment on it. He said, Ira, he said, I'm gonna have to pass because if I say anything about Wrigley Field and the Cubs, it's only gonna get me into trouble. And, you know, talking about writing, I do want to, there was something about Obama in writing that I could share with all of you. Another Chicago writer named Jonathan Alter, you may know, he's a historian, a journalist. And I was at a party with Jonathan Alter, and we were talking about Obama as a writer. And I said, well, I read the second book. I didn't read the first book, but I read the second book, which is about being a politician. He said, you didn't read the first book. I said, no. The first book is Dreams of My Father, Dreams from My Father. He said, you must read this book. It is a beautifully written book. It is just terrific. He said, in fact, and Alter covered the White House. He said, in fact, when I saw the president, I said to him, that book is so good, you're ruining it for the rest of us. So with this, I related this to Obama when I was talking to him. And I said to him, you know, there are a lot of people who wonder if you actually wrote this book yourself, because it was so beautiful and so poetic and so heartfelt, and it was just beautifully done. So I was saying to him, I'm sitting this far from him, and I said, because someone else was here, but we were talking like this, so, and I said, I noticed in the acknowledgments to Dreams of My Father that one of your editors for the book was a woman named Ruth Fessage, F-E-C-Y-C-H. And I said, I know Ruth Fessage because she edited 2 of my books. One of them was the Red Smith book. And so I was telling the president, and now I said, so I called Ruth Fessage. And I said, Ruth, I read Dreams of My Father. It was a great book, and you worked on the book, that's right. I said, tell me the truth. Did Obama really write this book himself? Now remember, I'm relating this conversation. Now I'm talking to Ruth Fessage as I'm talking to Obama. So I said to Ruth Fessage, did he really write this book himself? And she said, yes, he did. And I said, that son of a bitch. I got a laugh out of the president, but if I had to do it over again, I wouldn't have used the same language that I used to Ruth Fessage. Anyway, so we did the book, and Josh was great, and then the publisher was Abrams, who generally does, or normally does, art books. And some of you have the book, and some of you have seen the book, but this is as beautiful a sports book as I've ever seen. I had nothing to do with gathering the photographs and laying out the book, but it is sensational. Although they asked for one photograph, which I gave them, and that was because in the introduction I talk about my involvement as a boy and then older in Wrigley Field and the Cubs, and that I was on my high school baseball team, and they asked for a picture of me and my high school baseball team. So if any of you are interested, I think it's on page 24.
We know you contributed. You won your Pulitzer Prize for an article titled Minority Quarterback, later included in a book. Who turned out to be the minority in this case? And in addition, I'd like you to comment on what you have seen over this long time of covering sports about discrimination. I know you also wrote a book on Hank Greenberg, who was encountering anti-Semitism around the time that Jackie Robinson was first breaking into baseball. So you
Well, Greenberg was in the 30s when anti-Semitism was rife. Of course, Robinson broke
and
in
then-
in 47.
okay,
But he
and then
overlapped,
Robinson-
and then he had something with Robinson, which was a lovely
Okay,
moment.
so you've been able to look at, over a span of time, the situation of discrimination in sports, specifically, maybe more in baseball than other things. But I'd just like you to comment on some of the changes that you've seen, and also tell us about the minority quarterback.
Yeah, well, very briefly, minority quarterback was a white kid at Southern University, in a historically black school. And it was in Baton Rouge, and he had been a star high school player in Baton Rouge. Then he went to Louisiana Tech, and he was second team, and he wasn't playing much. And then the quarterback for Southern University got hurt, and they knew of Marcus Jacoby, and Marcus Jacoby, they asked him to try out, and he did, and he became the starting quarterback on an essentially all-black team, white kid, and there was discrimination because to a considerable degree, the quarterback position is supposed to be the brain position, and here's a white kid, being the quarterback, and at first there was adversity, and he had to win over these guys, and he won them over, his teammates. He won them over by just being good, and he took them to the black Super Bowl, essentially a college Super Bowl, and his team was down by about 4 points with like 30 seconds to go, and they're on the 15-yard line, and he threw a pass that at the end of that, it's caught, will win the game, but as he's throwing it, his arm was hit, the ball was intercepted, and they lost, and the game was played in Virginia, I believe, and showed discrimination when he came back to get his car in the parking lot at the university. There was a tree with a noose hanging from the tree, and there were other remarks, phone calls, and so forth. And then he was thinking of quitting, and he liked the school. He was getting an education there. He was a smart kid. He liked the school, and then he decided, and his parents wanted him to leave. Then he decided, I'm going to stick it out. He came back the next year, and he led them to the championship. Oh. It was a really nice story. And then he was just still feeling uncomfortable, and he transferred to Louisiana State University across town and didn't play football anymore. But the discrimination in the 30s with Hank Greenberg, and he had become the first Jewish superstar, and there was lots of discrimination, especially in 1938 when he was going to break Babe Ruth's single-season home run record, and he didn't do it. The record was 60. He got to 58, and 5 games to go, and he didn't do it. Some people thought that the white side, the opposing pitchers weren't giving him pitches to hit because they didn't want a Jew to break the record, and he totally denied that. But there were things, people would throw at his head, as they did with Jackie Robinson later on. And but in my book, there's an interesting moment in which the Cubs are bringing up their first black player, Gene Baker, from the minor leagues, 1953, late 53. And the general manager, Wood Matthews, also decided to bring in a shortstop from the Negro Leagues named Ernie Banks. Some of you may have heard of him. And the owner of the team, P.K. Wrigley, said to his general manager, we have one black player that's going to be the first black player on the Cubs, 1953. This is now 6 years after Jackie Robinson broke in with the Dodgers. And he said, we have one black player. Why are you bring up another black player? And Wood Matthews says, well, we need somebody to room with Gene Baker. So in other words, the feeling was no white guys were going to room with a black guy. My feeling is that the owner, or Whit Matthews, general manager, didn't ask any of the players whether any of them would want to room with Gene Baker. So, but they decided to get this guy from the Negro Leagues, Ernie Banks, and came up, and a day or two later, hits a home run, then hits another home run, and another one, and then some 20 years later or so, he hit his 512th home run and made the Hall of Fame. Gene Baker was a decent player for a handful of years, but the last baseball team to hire its first black player was the Boston Red Sox in 1959. And you know, Boston was known as kind of well, there's a lot of racial tension in Boston, as there are in other places, but Boston seemed to be particularly so. And the first one, Pumpsie Green, was in 1959, which is over a decade after Jackie Robinson broke into Major League Baseball. You know, it's in all sports, you know, so much has changed. When I was growing up, I mean, talking about quarterbacks, there were no black quarterbacks in the NFL, nor in college, essentially in Division I college football, and there were no black players in Southern schools like Alabama or Auburn, Mississippi State. Things began to change, maybe in the late '60s. At Alabama, I think it was about 1966 or '7. Alabama played USC, and they had a running back, a black guy named Sam Cunningham. I think his nickname was Slam Bam Cunningham. Anyway, he ran all over Alabama, and he scored like 3 touchdowns, and USC killed Alabama. And the coach of Alabama, Bear Bryant, would break the color line, and he said, because I want to get one of those, like Cunningham. He said, I want to get one of those. And that broke the color line at Alabama, and eventually the other schools. Mississippi State had all white players, and they were going to play Loyola Chicago in 1963 in the NCAA. The president of the school and the governor of Mississippi said, you cannot play against Loyola because they have four black starters. They have black players. We don't want you to play with black players. The Mississippi players, in the dead of night, got a bus, I think with their coach, and drove to wherever, Ohio, wherever they were going to play Loyola. And Mississippi State played Loyola, and Loyola, of course, won, and Loyola eventually won the NCAA championship with 4 of the 5 starters were black guys. And now, I can't help, every time I see Kentucky, I see Louisville, I see Alabama, I see Louisiana, I see Florida, I see all these southern schools with predominantly black players. And growing up as I did in the 50s and the 60s, there were no black players in these schools. And I wonder how much these black players today know this. I just wonder, you know, because sometimes, and I've interviewed, I mean, players, major league players, and asked them about Jackie Robinson, and they were not familiar with what he did. You know, it seems shocking, but it's true. And anyway, so you know, it's amazing how much has changed. And in the NFL right now, out of I don't know, 30 teams or 32 teams, easily a quarter to a half of the quarterbacks are black. How did they get so smart so quickly? This is surprising to me. You know?
It's really been a revolution.
Yeah. You know. And also some of these teams, if you're going to have black players, you had to have a white point guard, because the white point guard is smart. You know. Then along comes Magic Johnson, you know, among others like that, you know, and changes everything. And the whole thing was just totally stupid, you know.
I have just a couple of more questions, and then I want to open things up to our wonderful audience here. Your book, Dusable Panthers, the one that was named the best young adult book in 75 years, which is quite an honor, talks about high school players, right?
Yeah.
And there's a trend now for all kinds of sports leaders to be looking for talent at younger and younger ages, to the point where you've got kids in junior high school who are being scouted and kind of groomed to go on to professional sports. I wonder whether you feel this is a dangerous trend, just how you feel about this focus on younger and younger players.
You know, young gifted people, gifted athletes, very quickly they're put on pedestals. And there is a sense of unreality. You know, the things are given to them, I mean, by the fourth grade, you know that there's some talented people. But it's unfortunate that they're also almost commercialized. I mean, sometimes they're given sneakers, as I understand, and taken out to buy, you know, chocolate bars or whatever it is that fourth graders wanted, fifth graders and so on. And it's just it's really unfortunate, and it has to stop. Just today in the news, the National Labor Relations Board, you know, said that college athletes are Division I college athletes are employees and of the university, and so this is the beginning of the end of a fiction of amateurism. I mean, it ended in the Olympics, where we have now professionals when they were even professionals when they were called amateurs. Now they are professionals who are called professionals. And this is all changing, and I think to the better. And this is going to bring a sense of reality to it. You know, as far as these fourth graders and fifth graders, you just hope that they have parents with their feet on the ground, or uncles, or pastors, or somebody, you know, to lead the way to perspectives, proper perspectives, and in a way that they should deal with the world as they grow up.
Last question, going to the other end of the age spectrum. Many of our students at National Louis University are returning students. They're adults, and they're maybe starting their second career, or maybe putting aside what they've had to do in order to survive, in order to make a living, and now they have a chance to go to perhaps the thing that they love. And I'm sure they'd like to hear from you, because you have had this amazing career, especially thinking that you were, in your high school years, not showing great promise. And you spent 26 years at the New York Times, and now you're somewhat retired, but I know that you have many exciting projects that you're working on, this being the Wrigley Field book being the latest thing, but I've even heard a rumor that you're writing a play. And I wonder if you would like to just share any secrets that you have for staying young, staying creative, continuing to explore new things.
Well, the only advice I could give, and this is almost a cliche, but it's true, is number one is follow your heart. Okay, so we've all heard that before. But you have to have the guts and the courage to follow your heart. I have an accountant who is a very fine pianist, and he majored in music, He's in the 70s, and he majored in music and accounting at the University of Rochester many years ago. And his father said to him, and he's very smart, but his father said to him, "You'll never earn a living as a musician. It's just too hard. It's just too hard. Become an accountant." Well, he's an accountant, and he's a good accountant. I mean, he keeps me out of jail, which is really good. And but I know that he would love to have been a professional pianist, and he's really good, but he didn't follow his heart, and I did. I mean, once I found out that I I had some ability at this. Of course, if you don't have the ability, you'll find out soon, and you'll lose heart. But you have to, like Red Smith said, try again, and I would try again. And what I would do, and I would, if there would be writers here, you read something, and you think, and you like it. How did he do it? Okay. Like, someone would make me laugh out loud. I mean, Mike Royko used to make me laugh out loud. George Plimpton was a writer, and I suggest, and he was a wonderful, wonderful writer. And he could make me laugh out loud. And P.J. Woodhouse is another one. Just funny writers. And I would study them. I would type up a couple paragraphs of how they did it, how they led up to something that would make me laugh, So I would study them, and I would go over it. How did they do it? And then I would go over if someone touched me, moved me. There's the great scene, To Kill a Mockingbird. It was the great movie, and then there was a scene in which you just cry. It's just if you don't know it, it's the trial scene in which a black man is wrongly accused, and Gregory Peck is the lawyer. And I'm almost going to cry when I think of it. It was just a great scene in which Gregory Peck comes walking out after defending the black guy, and I'm going to cry. Really, I'm moved by. But go to the book by Harper Lee. How did she do this? Now, of course, if you're going to be in movies and you want to be a director, how did the director do this? But in the book, it's just moving. And I'll just bring that in, as an example. To Kill a Mockingbird was one of the classic books of our time. And how did she do this? How did she build this up? How did she build the characters to begin with? And I would study this stuff to see how they did it. And if it was work, and then you do something, you send it in, and you get a rejection slip. Then you get another rejection slip. I got a bunch of rejection slips. I got a lot of rejection slips. But I'll use a phrase that is not used in polite company. When I would get a rejection slip, because I would go on again with something else, and I would say, "Fuck 'em."
With that, we will open the questions to any of you. I believe there are people coming around with microphones, so just raise your hand, and we'll be glad to hear from you.
Start. Okay, what is your opinion of the Greek curse from the billy goat?
Well, I don't believe in curses. I've cursed myself, actually, and I know it doesn't work. But the Billy Goat, Billy Sianis owned the Billy Goat Tavern in 1945. He bought 2 tickets to the World Series, Cubs Tigers, and it was called the Billy Goat, and he had a pet goat named Murray the Goat, and he brought his goat to the game, and he went into the stands with the goat, and I guess the officials felt 2 things about the goat. Number 1, the goat smelled, and number 2, it obscured the vision of the people sitting behind him, behind the goat. And so not only did they throw the goat out, but they threw Billy Sianis out too. So he cursed the Cubs, and he said they'll never until they allow a goat in the ballpark, they'll never get to the World Series. And so far they haven't. But in 1985 or 86, he died, and his nephew Sam Sianis made a rapprochement with the Cubs, and Sam Sionis brought a goat on to the field. It may have been the great-grandson of Murray the goat or something, and he brought the goat onto the field, and so there was Sam Sionis, and there was the goat, and then there was the guy with the scooper behind, so they lifted the curse. They lifted the curse.
So now there's no excuse.
The Cubs at this point are curseless, but they still haven't won. So.
Thank you. Ira?
Yes.
At what point in your sports writing career did you tackle the Maxwell Street book, and was that your first published book? Thank you.
No, that's Laurie Gross from the Maxwell Street board, and they still do work on Maxwell Street. And Maxwell Street was my third book. And I grew up, both my parents were born and raised on Maxwell Street, and I grew up on the west side, but I worked starting in 1951 when I was 11 years old, selling nylon stockings, women's nylons, 3 pair for $1. And they come on the street, crowded street, people were suspicious of some of the wares on Maxwell Street. And I tried to alleviate their anxiety by saying, there's only one hole in these socks, and that's where you put your foot in. People just kept walking by. And then at 16, I had my own belt stand. And so this was my history. And then I learned of some of the Chicagoans who grew up around Maxwell Street. It was a remarkable group of people. Benny Goodman, the great clarinetist, and Admiral Rickover, who was the father of the atomic submarine, nuclear submarine, and Barney Ross, the great fighter. Arthur Goldberg became a Supreme Court justice. It was a remarkable thing. And so I decided I would like to do a book about this, and this history of these people and my people, essentially. And I approached Doubleday, the big publisher then, and they agreed to have me do the book. And they were kind enough, like Abrams was, to also offer me money to do it. So I really got excited. But it was my third book. I had done a book on Oscar Robertson before that. I had a collection of my newspaper columns called Beyond the Dream, and Maxwell Street, and it's still around. It's interesting. Today I had lunch with two federal judges. One of them, Judge Joel Flom, who Jewish, grew up in Hudson, New York, and he brought a copy. Maxwell Street's out of print, but he brought a copy of the book for me to sign to his grandchildren, because he said they should know about a place like Maxwell Street. So that's...
I think there's somebody back there. Oh, here we go.
Ira, you are a college athlete. Are college athletes employees?
Well, I wasn't that kind of a college athlete. I played at Roosevelt University before going to Miami of Ohio. But one who asked the question is Joe Rucklick, who was a great player for Northwestern University and played 3 years for the Philadelphia Warriors, a teammate of Wilt Chamberlain. And Joe Rucklick is a footnote in history. When Wilt Chamberlain scored the 100 points, which probably will never be beaten, 100 points in a game, Joe Rucklick had the assist. He threw the pass to Chamberlain for Chamberlain's last basket for the 100th point. So that's Joe Rucklick. And next to him is former senator, senator for Northwestern University, graduate in 2012, Lucas Merkovich. I think you guys can answer the question better, but I think that you are employees. You both got degrees from a very good university, but it was a lot of work, and I don't know how you spend 40 or 50 hours a week at basketball or football, and and you're physically tired, how you open a book to start studying. It's Herculean to me. And then, you have a jersey, the Rucklick jersey, number 20, and the university sells it. They make money, and they give Joe Rucklick nothing for it. This was unfair, and I think it was just greedy on the part of the universities and the loathsome NCAA. So I don't know if that answers your question. We can talk about it later, Joe.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hi. I know you grew up in K-Town on the west side, but I'm from the south side, so we want to know if the Sox are going to get a book too.
If what?
The Sox are going to get a book too. The White Sox. Are we going to get a book?
Oh.
Like the Cubs?
Yeah. Are they going to buy a book? Is that what you're asking? Well, I would go to Comiskey Park too and do the same kinds of things that I did with Wrigley Field, but I only have one of these books in me. But I did interview Reinsdorf briefly for the book, and he's in the book, and he told me that there was a Cubs Sox series, and he went to a game at Wrigley Field, and he was recognized. People started throwing things at him and cursing him. And in like the second or third inning, he had to leave under armed guard, And he said, "That's the last time I've been in Wrigley Field." So and then there's Ozzie Guillen in the Wrigley Memories, and Ozzie was the manager of the White Sox. Ozzie hated Wrigley Field. It's a dump, He said, "But I have relatives coming from Venezuela, and the first thing they want to do is see Wrigley Field, and I'm the manager of the White Sox." So to answer your question, we'll get somebody. Maybe Josh Noel will do the White Sox. Not for me. Okay.
There's a
Yeah.
question back there.
The last questioner stole my thunder. I was going to ask you if you had a knock on the head and lost your sense of direction going to Sox Park, and that's why you wrote the book on Wrigley. But in a more serious vein, I've always enjoyed your columns immensely. You write incisively, and it's always been a great pleasure to read your work. I had very quickly 2 baseball-related questions. Number one, do Rose and Bonds belong in the Hall of Fame? And a more general one, and perhaps you'd be particularly adept at answering this question, being a writer. It seems that the corpus of writing on baseball exceeds the cumulative total of all the other great American sports, both in terms of prose and poetry. Why do you think that is?
Well, baseball, was so-called national pastime, and I guess more people were fans of baseball, maybe less so now, but maybe the best sports writing is about boxing through the years. And I have a collection. I'm going to promote myself for a minute. There's a collection here called Counterpunch, a collection of my boxing columns over a period of over 40 years. And Jack Dempsey, I interviewed him, and Joe Louis, all the way up to Muhammad Ali and beyond, Floyd Mayweather. But the reason for boxing is that it's so dramatic, and that the best kinds of writing, the most dramatic kinds of writing, deal with life and death. And in boxing, which is a brutal sport, but it's scientific, it's sometimes called the sweet science, but there's a science to it, but it is brutal. Every fight, whether it's conscious or not, every fight, it's possible that one of those fighters will not survive. There are deaths in the ring every year, but it's dramatic in that way, and these fighters are gladiators essentially, and so they go into this. They know that the other fighters have been killed in the ring, and but they do it anyway, and some of them are some of the greatest characters, the managers, some of the greatest characters, and I love being around them, and it's just so basic. And then there was Muhammad Ali. And I'll tell you 2 quick stories about Muhammad Ali. Very brief, but 2 quick ones. One was, I was on an airplane with him. We were about to take off. And the flight attendant comes by and said, Mr. Raleigh, you have to put your seatbelt on. And he said, Superman don't need no seatbelt. She said, Superman don't need no airplane either.
Don't need to what?
And then in Chicago, it was about 1970, he was training for a fight with Jimmy Ellis. And I came here to Chicago, and he was training on the south side. There was a hotel he was staying at a hotel by Lakeshore Drive. And I spent the day with him. Before coming to Chicago, I ran into a woman I know. And I told her I was coming. What are you doing? I'm coming to Chicago. I'm going to interview Muhammad Ali. And she said, oh, can you get an autograph for my two boys? They're two small boys. They're like 9 and 11. I said, I'm a professional writer. I can't ask him, he's a subject I'm writing about, I can't ask him for an autograph. Oh, please, the kids would love it. And so I said, look, just to get her off my back, I said, if the opportunity arises, I'll ask him for an autograph for your two boys. And so I came here and spent the day with him. At the end of the day, I said, champ, I hate to ask you this, but would you mind signing an autograph for two small boys? He said, no problems. I gave him my pen and pad. He said, what are their names? I told him the names. And for some reason, I said, their mother has trouble making them clean their room. He wrote, to Timmy and Ricky from Muhammad Ali, clean that room or I will seal your doom.
I'll seal your what? Doom.
And people said he didn't write his own poetry.
Let me just interject this one question about Sammy Sosa. He seems to bring out some of the best and some of the worst aspects of more recent baseball. What do you think are the greatest threats in the game today?
Well, the threat was steroids. I mean that was a black mark on the game, supposed to be cheating. And I don't know how much cheating there was still to this day in steroids. Even doctors aren't quite sure. Maybe hit the ball a little farther, but it certainly doesn't help your hand-eye coordination, as far as I know. I don't know. And you know, there have been, going beyond that, there have been lockouts by the owners, and strikes by the players. And the game continues, breaking records in attendance, and people still love it. And I mean, if your team is winning, the crowds are great, except for Wrigley Field. The crowds, no matter what, win or lose, it comes there. People come out to the ballpark. It's for the park, less for the team, I think, although they're rabid Cub fans. But it seems that no matter what happens, it goes on. You know, like in Milwaukee, Ryan Braun did the steroids, admitted it. And if Milwaukee is in the hunt for the pennant, they're going to pack the house, and every time Ryan Braun comes up, he's going to get standing ovations. You know, I mean, people forgive if the player can help your team win. So people are very forgiving along those lines. And I don't know. I vote for the I vote for the Hall of Fame. I still vote for the Hall of Fame, and I vote for Pete Rose. Well, I used to. He's no longer. He was never on the ballot, but I used to write him in. They never put him on the ballot, which they should have done. You know, my contention about Pete Rose is that he admitted gambling on baseball as a manager, but never as a player or player manager, and there's no evidence that he gambled on baseball as a player or player manager. Therefore, he was clean as a player, so he should go in the Hall of Fame as a player, but he's not going to the Hall of Fame as a manager. And if teams don't want him to be in the front office or to manage or something, that's something else again. But if Pete Rose had not gone into managing, and if he had gone into another profession, if he had become a lawyer, or if he had become a professor of writing, he'd be in the Hall of Fame right now, because there was never a taint of him betting on baseball as a player. Okay. And I don't know who did, we all knew Ryan Braun didn't do performance-enhancing drugs. Turns out Ryan Braun did do performance-enhancing drugs. So we don't know, and I don't know who, and I can't judge who did and who did not. Everybody knows that Derek Jeter did not do performance-enhancing drugs. Okay, and he's not proved, it's never been proved that he did or didn't. But we all know he didn't. He's so clean. Okay. Would you bet everything you have in your bank and your house and everything else that Derek Jeter did not do drugs? And the answer is no. Okay? So you may be 99% sure, but there's still that 1%. And so as far as I'm concerned, I don't judge these guys. I vote for, if I have the vote, I vote for Clemens, I vote for Bonds, I vote for Sosa, I vote for McGuire. And then I vote for, Greg Maddux, of course, who I loved as a played for the Cubs. And Maddux, and I do know from people who know. I mean, I am a reporter, and I've been around, and I know that there are players, a handful, or maybe less, but some, in the Hall of Fame who did performance-enhancing drugs. Okay. So at this point, I'm not judging anybody, and 25% of the sports writers vote for people like Bonds and Clemens and so forth, and I'm in that minority.
Okay.
Okay. Oops.
Yeah.
Hi, Ira. You said that you were raised in K-Town. I was from that area also. And I need to ask, did you say that you went to Bryan?
Yes.
Yeah, I went there too.
You?
Yeah, I went to Bryan.
Okay.
Yeah. However, the question is that what is your best advice for any age group? Well, of course, for those who are pursuing careers, but at any age group when they're facing obstacles and dark times.
I didn't hear that last part.
What is your best advice for any age group, especially for those who are, pursuing careers? What's your best advice for when they're facing obstacles and dark times?
You can't, you can't be daunted by it, and you just have to feel in your heart that you can do it, whatever it is. And there's, and like writing, you're going to get a lot of rejections, and not everybody's like what you do, even if you're successful. I mean, they're successful writers. They write a book, they get knocked, by the critics, but you just don't give up. I mean, it's like life, you don't die, if you don't get rich. And if you're going to write, you read good writers, and see how they do it, as I was saying before about humor or drama or tragedy or poignant stuff. You keep doing it, and you go to a class like Professor Cook's class, Koch, and you get criticism back and forth, and you learn that way. But there's criticism, and you take the criticism.
Just to tag on to that, there's a writer named Kate Dicamillo. She is currently a national representative to encourage children to read books. And she's won many awards for her books. She started out wanting to write, and she received, and this is the exact number, 435 rejections in the course of about 3 or 4 years when she continually sent out her work. And she finally broke through that, became a Newbery Award winner, and she now represents authors and tries to encourage other authors and also encouraging young people to read. So you've got to have that resilience, but at the same time, you've got to be thinking of how to improve. So as Ira is saying, in his early career, he was open to the criticism. He didn't say to Red Smith, "Oh, I guess you didn't like my work, so I'll throw in the towel." He just kept on. And a good part of it, they say 10% talent, 90% sweat. So a good part of it is the willingness to keep going back and looking at your stuff critically, and then accept those rejections, but realize that you have something unique to offer, and you're gonna offer it.
We have just enough time for one more question. I didn't realize that was so loud.
Hi, I'm Barbara Berchala, and I had to come back here to get the mic. I am
sitting over here.
persistent.
I
Yes,
saw you
I
sitting.
was. I had to come back here to be heard. I want to thank you very much, Ira, for coming out today. And your speech was most uplifting. My son is with me. His name is Ronald. He's sitting next to me. And he is a writer and a philosopher. I'm very proud of him. And I believe that some of the words that you said today were very inspiring to him. We haven't had, of course, a chance to talk yet. But I certainly am very, very thankful that we came, and I thank you. And you sold me on your book. I'm not a Cubs fan. I'm a Yankee fan. Don't hate me. But I love the Yankees. I've been a Yankee fan since 1957 when Brooklyn left. Dodgers left Brooklyn and went to Los Angeles. So I went to the Yankees. Thanks so much.
Thank you, thank you.
I just want to remind you that we're wrapping up the informal part, and Ira is going to stay around if some of you would like to have a word with him or have a book signed by him. He will stick around informally after this, but I thank you so much
I'll sit over there.
for coming.
And thank you. It was my pleasure to be addressing this great audience. I appreciate that.